Hey everyone, Patrick here. Thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Well Standard Podcast and our season on entrepreneurship. My guest is none other than the founder of Elance. His name is Beerud Sheth. You guys are going to love this interview. So a few months ago, I interviewed a good friend of mine, Josh Lannon. He is the actually co-author with his wife, Lisa, of The Social Capitalist. This is it's a great interview, an incredible idea, and it's awesome to come across companies that really fit this bill. I believe that what has become Upwork, Elance, which was founded by my guest Beerud Sheth, combined with Odesk, and then they formed Upwork. Upwork has tens of millions of users, thousands of skills, multiple categories as far as value is concerned, services is concerned, and it's a platform that has really transformed society. Starting with the initial user, which is the business owner, the entrepreneur, those that can't necessarily afford a graphic designer or an assistant or a virtual assistant or someone to help from a marketing perspective or from a design like graphic design, logos, and fonts and icons. I mean, you name it. There's pretty much anything you need is on Upwork.com. But it enables just so much from the standpoint of an entrepreneur who has an idea that wants that to become a reality. But it's also transformed the lives of a lot of individuals, starting with the stay-at-home mom, which we're going to talk about on the episode, as well as third world countries. Beerud was honored by the Philippines and acknowledging him for Elance and the idea of this platform and how it's created an additional $250 million of GDP to the Philippines, and it's doing so in other countries that are emerging and becoming present in this connected world that we're in. You guys are gonna love this interview because Beerud is clearly an incredibly intelligent individual and is passionate about disruption, is passionate about technology that's going to make a difference. And as I mentioned, from a social capitalism standpoint, he totally fits the bill. So does the company of Upwork. So can't wait for you guys to experience this podcast. And for links to what he's up to now, also links to some of the things we mentioned on the episode, go ahead over to thewellstandard.com. All right, now to my interview with Beerud Sheth, founder of Elance. So Beerud, it's awesome to have you on. And I first heard of Elance. It's probably been 10 years now, but I was working out at my gym, and there was a married couple that came in, and they're from the United States, and they were talking about how they've lived around the world. They lived in Australia, they lived in Paris, and they were in Salt Lake to go skiing for the winter, and then we're going to take off to the country of Georgia to work. And I was like, and this was about 10 years ago, and I was like, what do you do? And they said, one was like a marketer, the other was a technical writer, and they basically work on Elance. And I had never heard of Elance before then, and since then, I've used it. It's made a huge difference in my business, and I look at the impact it's made on other businesses as well, and it's just fascinating to see something like the business that you helped create makes such a difference in the world. So would you mind talking to us about your experience just creating Elance, the genesis of it, and just that the overall experience of seeing it take off and impact the world?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's really, I'm just impressed, gratified, excited about how far, a little idea sort of in my head and in my co-founders' heads, how far that idea grew and became a business, and now, just impacting millions of lives. So, yeah, I think this was in the late 90s where the internet was just coming about, right? In the mid 90s where the commercialization of the internet began. You started seeing eBay and Amazon taking off. And around that time, I was actually working on Wall Street. I just finished my, computer science at MIT, grad school at MIT, and then I was working there. And a lot of these influences, sort of my personal life experience kind of melded sort of three different and distinct influences, right? One was the fact that I'm originally from India. So coming from India, that there's a lot of smart people, talented people all over the world. right? So I think that was one element. The second element was as a computer science student and as an early adopter of the internet, you knew that the power of connecting people, of making distance irrelevant was the second key influence. And the third thing was, having worked on Wall Street, I realized that you can create these marketplaces even for seemingly illiquid securities, right? And when you take those three things, I mean, what we ended up with sort of was this construct of an online freelance marketplace. And it was in the beginning, it was really hard, right? I mean, like, what kind of services and how do you build trust and how do you minimize fraud and having reputation and profiles? How do you even compete, right? Because services are very illiquid, they're very unique and customized. And how do you compare and contrast different things and so on? So I think there was a lot of trial and error and iteration and sort of, as they call it, product market fit that we had to explore and figure out. But yeah, I mean, we persevered through a lot of things, and then of course there's the business angle of it, right? Fundraising, recruiting, competing, PR and marketing and customer acquisition and so on and so forth. So I mean, there's lots of stories to share, but I think we started on a good track, and then another big thing was surviving the financial crisis of 2001 and then 2008 and so on. So I think it was a long story short, but I think today the core thesis is still valid, right? The fact that people who want to get work done can put their request up there somewhere, and anyone anywhere in the world can say, okay, I'll do it for a good rate, and they connect, do the transaction, do it successfully for the most part, and so on. And I think it's sort of, and not just that, right? And like when we were starting in the late 90s, the only thing you could do was sort of remote work, because it was only after the rise of the smartphone that you could actually capture location, which means now you could even do local freelancing, right? So you could argue even Uber and DoorDash and Instacart and a lot of these services are sort of direct descendants of the same idea, but applied in a different technology environment and so on. So the gig economy has sort of gone on to be much more than just what Elance or Upwork does now. It's much broader than that.
So as you look back, what would you consider the milestone that took place where you were like, wow, this is going to be big. Like, this is going to connect the world. It's because obviously, most entrepreneurs look back and, the idea and seeing that come to fruition, is really cool to just think back and experience on. Obviously, the in between, most entrepreneurs, I don't know, would want to go back and relive some of those moments, especially two financial crises.
Exactly.
But but you looking back, like, what was that moment where you were like, you or your partners were like, wow, this is big.
So I guess maybe a couple of incremental moments, right? So I mean, of course, we did a lot of research, we had a lot of ideas, put it all on PowerPoint, but it's not real until you sort of have the first customer experience, right? So I think before we even officially launched the site, we created like an internal prototype, and we said, let's test it, let's just try it with some people. So we literally kind of asked, maybe begged a few friends, to put some projects in there, saying, "Hey, do you have some work that you need to get done?" And you don't, for it to be a realistic test, you don't want to influence it too much. So we didn't want to tell them what it was or what it is. We just really wanted to be as authentic as possible. So we asked a few friends. We were in New York at this time. We asked a few friends to sort of put some requests in the marketplace. And then on the supply side, actually, well, I come from IIT, which is sort of one of the top engineering institutes in India. So we just asked, like, a few students. I mean, it was the summer, so they were doing their summer internships and so on. We said, look, can you just sign up as service providers? And, you're going to see some projects, and you pick on what you want to work on, you do it, you deliver it, and you'll get paid for it. And that was it, right? And you kind of you want to leave it there and have it take off by itself. And so we had maybe, I don't know, 10 or 20 projects put up there, and we had maybe a dozen students. And literally 2 to 4 weeks later, right, we sort of hear back from some of the students or even the professors saying, "What are you guys doing?" Because all these guys are giving up their internships to work on these projects because they're excited, they're loving it, they're making money. And similarly on this side, on the buyer side, if you will, you had people saying, this is great work. I mean, it was hard to find talent in New York, and here these guys are getting it done in a week or two for a lot lower, and it's really good quality work. And it just and then okay, it's real, right? Because it wasn't stage managed. It's not like we told these people to do it, but there is a natural need. And when you uncover that, this goes deep. That there's thousands of more people, maybe millions more people like that. And I think that was the big aha. And then of course, once we got funding and so on, we also we scaled it up. And after that, there was a series of milestones. Maybe the first quarter where we did $1 million worth of spend going through the site. I think that was a big one. But thereafter, it's just been steady growth. I mean, sort of cumulative compounded growth over 20 years leads to big numbers now. It does what is it, about a 2 billion plus in service transactions on Upwork.
But you have, I was looking at some stats recently, and you have, there's 16 million, active users. 5,000 skills is one of the other statistics that made me think back on an experience I had at Dreamforce, where you're out in San Francisco, and talking to somebody and having no idea what they were talking about. Even though they were speaking English, I had no idea what their business was, because it was just completely foreign to me. And that was my experience going in and looking at some of the skills that are associated with some of the freelance jobs and requests on Upwork. But it goes to show you that 5,000 skills just is, it's an incredible way, right, for a business or for a startup or for just an idea that somebody has to really flesh it out in a inexpensive way,
Right.
to test. I mean, you obviously went through prototype stage. I mean, people have ideas, and it's the cliche of, ideas are worthless without execution. But this is a way in which you can make it, very easy to test and prototype something to see if there is really legs underneath it. So I think it's just profound, and like you said, it continues as as technology grows and evolves. So do the need for different types of skills and positions.
Yeah, that's true. And, in fact, the thing that surprises me is it should, in fact, be a few more skills, right? So some of the categories that did not work out as well as we expected, let's say business consulting or even legal or accounting and so on, these tend to be a little more business. People are concerned about security and privacy of data and who they are sharing with and so on. So it's still, and by the way, a lot of these are solved problems technically, right? But it's really just this mental block around sharing this in the cloud and so on. So I think there are still a lot more categories it can expand to, but certainly on the technical side, the design side, a lot of the creative skills. I mean, I think that process has been nailed, and the fact that you have portfolios and profiles and feedback and reputation and so on makes it a lot easier to be able to do these services. At this point now, I mean, you just have to be crazy to not use this, because anything else would be just far more complex, far more complicated. Yeah.
Yep. So if I would say you have an extremely unique perspective on work, and you had mentioned one of the buzzwords that's out there right now, the gig economy. Like how do you view the future of the economy, the future of work? Because even though Upwork is known by many, it's still a very unknown platform, and just continues. The whole idea behind freelancing and contracting continues to evolve and be more familiar to businesses as an outlet, as opposed to the typical traditional hiring someone to perform a job. Like, how do you look at the economy? How do you look at the future of the economy and the future of work and business?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I agree. We've barely scratched the surface, long as we've come over the last 20 years. So I think this is, as they say, with these big technology changes, we tend to sort of overestimate the short term and underestimate the long term. And there's no question about that, this is happening slowly. It's percolating through the economy until one fine day, just sort of you hit an inflection point and suddenly everyone is doing it this way, right? So for example, in the earlier days, we started with smaller businesses that were willing to, they were more desperate. They had a resource crunch. They were, they had tight budgets. So they were the earliest adopters of the platform, and then they loved it and loved it in scale and would use it repeatedly. But more recently, you've started seeing large enterprises, right? Really, really big brands, consumer goods companies, and so on, right? They are in maybe 100 countries, and they need to design packaging and brochures and collateral and so on, copywriting and things like that, or even technical stuff, right? So creating websites in different languages in different countries and so on. So I think you're starting to see more and more enterprises, and in fact, the platforms are also evolving. For example, large companies want to have pre-approved group of freelancers, right? They don't want just anyone using it, and they've been pre-approved, pre-certified, pre-verified, whatever it is. So you're creating these private marketplaces that enable these sort of interactions, right? So as these things happen, so on the employer side, right, there's this greater and greater need to to have a flexible workforce, right? If you think about what AWS and cloud computing did to our computing and IT spend, right, which is why have dedicated servers on premise when you can get them,
Cloud-based.
you can just get them as needed, when needed, and you can sort of increase and decrease on the fly.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you apply the same idea to human resources, not just your computing resources, it leads to an Upwork like model, right? So just like cloud computing is barely about 3 to 4% of the global IT spend, you see the same thing here, right? I think the Upwork model is barely, a very small fraction of the overall spend on workforce. And I think as people move to these models where where the platforms are good enough to support enterprise requirements, and businesses are ready for that flexibility. And it's not just on the business side, it's even people, right? I mean, people would like more. We talk about work-life balance, we talk about flexibility, and I think people really value that. And we're going to get into a world where you can literally live anywhere, work anytime, and we'll have tools doing the match for us, perhaps even in real time, saying, oh, I have family visiting, so I'm going to take it easy for the next few hours or the next couple of days, but then I want to catch up on my work. So it just, I think there's so much potential to make to enable more productive lives for everyone, and more, a better economic life, but even a more personal, balanced life as well.
Well, it's interesting. This is going to really, not necessarily in the United States, but outside the United States. But I was at kind of a private dinner a number of years ago with a member of the Cato Institute, and they had been instrumental in consulting with one of the Eastern European countries that was part of the former Soviet Union, and he talked about how you can create prosperity in a country, in an economy, right, using very free market capitalistic principles, certain monetary constraints. And I look at that, and it's there's so much work involved and so much of a mindset shift of people to accelerate prosperity in that type of company or country. But you look at what I would say Upwork has done and the ecosystem that exists. It's based on, I would say, very similar principles. And proof is that you personally were thanked by the Philippines Minister of Science and Technology for increasing GDP by about $250 million. And so you look at the platform where you have an incentive, okay, that someone can get paid, but you also have an incentive to do good work because of ratings. And then you have the incentive to increase your skill set, increase your certifications. So it's kind of like you built this ecosystem / economy that is enabled, countries that may not, have the wherewithal from a paradigm standpoint to, set up their monetary system and set up their laws and set up their structure in a way that's going to create more prosperity for people. But in essence, you've done that with Elance. So how have you, when you've, first talked to the Minister of Science and Technology in the Philippines, like what was that experience like for you?
Yeah, I think in fact it's more than the stuff you mentioned, right? In that Elance or Upwork is actually solving problems that are not possible through any other means. If you're familiar with the geography of Philippines, by the way, it's a few thousand islands
Islands, yeah.
distributed all over, right? So it's just not practical to set up roads and infrastructure and factories and all of these sort of high employment producing activities that the traditional industrial economy has done, right? So on the other hand, what they discovered, and a lot of it was kind of bottoms up, right? But what they said was people with some basic skills in certain areas, and then with Wi-Fi infrastructure, which is a lot easier to set up, could then plug into this global economy, work from home, work from wherever they are, and suddenly you can provide employment to thousands and millions of people around the country, and it's so perfectly well suited for this sort of economic geographic situation. And it didn't, it doesn't take a lot, but the return on investment in terms of the employment, what it does for the communities, the fact that people can stay where they are and have those communities thrive was just really impressive. So I think I sort of bumped into the minister, and once she found out that I'd founded Elance, she was super excited, saying it's a complete game changer, where the official poverty alleviation schemes include training people, skilling them in certain areas, giving them connecting them to the web, and then putting them on work and on Elance and Upwork and so on. And it's sort of really impacted millions of lives. And of course, the economic value for the country is great too. But even if there are other ways of getting GDP growth, there's actually no other way of employing people in far-flung areas where all you have, what do you need for Upwork? All you need is an internet connection and of course the skill that you have,
Yep.
but nothing else, right? So from an infrastructure standpoint, it's just really impressive.
But there's also, the built-in, because yeah, you're hitting all those principles, and then the built-in accountability system, right,
Right.
where you essentially have checks and balances to ensure that there's good work, and that a person maintains their reputation in order to get future work. That's also built in, which I think is a vital part, of an economy.
That's right.
And
And I mean, I'm sorry, but you're right, because in many of these countries, sometimes the currencies are not that stable, for example, or the trust ecosystems are not stable. But what happens is the profile or the reputation they've built on Elance or Upwork is suddenly their recognition. I mean, it's more important than a college degree from a college that may not be accredited, or you don't even know if the documents are true or not, but the work that you've done on Upwork is validated from people and so on. And similarly, the whole payment infrastructure and so on that we set up, right? So it allows people to plug into a global economy instantly, irrespective of the educational infrastructure or the physical infrastructure or the economic and financial infrastructure in the country. And that just, you sort of suddenly leapfrog all of these challenges where previously or without Upwork, I mean, they would, these would be sort of prohibitive. I mean, it would just completely preempt any way of getting out of this situation. But now you really just connect up and you're a part of the global economy.
and that is, Philippines is one example, and I look at the other, the emerging markets that have just hundreds of millions of people that are kind of plugging into the global network of things and trying to find opportunities, right? And really it's fascinating. I mean, we can go off on out for hours on this, but just the whole leapfrog effect, where you're right, you have this a college degree has become more of a statement on a resume or a credibility factor, where now I would say, especially with Elance, I'm not sure a college degree is as important as like the quality of work and the ranking of that work. And then you look at just others that are whether it's Africa or India or parts of China, the Philippines. I mean, there's so many different emerging markets that are getting plugged into the infrastructure of the internet, and then have a platform in which they can be incentivized to learn a skill and to do good work and to feed their family and evolve. Whereas like the United States, I would say in a sense, it's kind of falling behind, right? People are not doing that. They're preparing for retirement, or they're, betting on their resume and their degree and their resume to, continue to do the trick. So it's interesting just to see kind of how the global economy is evolving, in a certain way, oftentimes faster than the U.S. economy in a sense.
Yeah, I think, maybe we are spoiled for choices in the US, right? I mean, obviously the economic growth is strong, employment is strong right now, and, has been for the last 50, 70 years.
Mm.
So I think people expect or get used to it, right? But I think certainly in the rest of the world, this is the only way out of sometimes of their situation and so on. So it has far greater impact. But I think even within the US now, you're starting to see more and more of this. It may be regional, right? You may be in the Midwest, but now you can work on the coast, right? East Coast or West Coast. So suddenly it gives you that flexibility. You can stay in the community that you love, in the neighborhoods that you like, and still be able to do high quality work where the economic activity is, and so on. And Upwork now has gone on to add features where you can find local freelancers, somebody in the neighborhood, right? Because even if the work can be done remotely, you might just want to meet them face to face, maybe in the beginning or at the end, and so on, or whatever be the reason, or some particular skill set or language capability, and so on. So I think, or just time zone, right? You might want them to be in the same time zone. So you're starting to see these sort of local ecosystems emerging, and so on. And I think, the great thing about the US is it's sort of very dynamic. So even if not everybody is doing it, the ones who do, the early adopters will reap the benefits. And and you're seeing a lot of people do that. I mean, another category, for example, that really loved Elance and Upwork right from the earliest days was professional women that, when they choose to have kids, for example, or when the kids are young and they want to spend enough time with them, but are still exceptionally skilled, have the desire and the ability to do good work. But your traditional 9 to 5 job with the daily commute, it just wasn't amenable to sort of those work-life choices. But again, Upwork or Elance provided that option, and they were sort of our biggest fans from day one, right? So you'd have these, in a way, extremely talented, people that just wanted a little bit of flexibility that's not available in traditional work. So I think it just opens up a lot of possibilities, a lot of markets in the US, but also worldwide.
Well, I'll end with this, and I would love for you to share with listeners about what you're working on now, how they can follow you, keep up with your work. But I had a guest on earlier this year who's become a great friend of mine. He wrote a book called the Social Capitalist, and he talked about a lot of the social issues, not just in the United States, but worldwide. And I thought of Upwork as being very social. Not that this was your intention. I think this is, whether it was your intention or not, it's become that. But it's one of those ways in which it can, socially benefit. Philippines is one of them, by using capitalistic principles. And I find it fascinating that, the examples you're using of women that have skill sets, that have chosen to, a certain lifestyle that's not conducive to, a 9 to 5. But you're also finding, retirees, or those pre-retirees, those that are on the verge of retirement, that are short. They're short assets. They're short, Social Security, and they can't maintain their lifestyle. This gives an option for them to maintain their lifestyle, but continue to, operate in their respective skill set. And so I look at the social good, and using kind of a platform that includes very economically friendly principles, and the difference that it's made and will make.
No, I totally believe that, and in fact, I've always felt that some of the best social good comes out uh, from companies that may not be explicitly social, but are viable, are sustainable, have an inherent business model, which means they can keep doing that good without having to wait for charitable donations and things like that, right? So I think that was, right from day one, that's always been the focus. I mean, we were very conscious of the impact it can have to lives around the world, and by plugging them into this global economy. But if you just did that without building a successful, viable, self-sustaining model that can continue to grow and drive economic benefit, even on the other side, then it just then you're always dependent on this constant flow of donations. And so I think that's the most exciting thing here. And I think if you look at the impact that Elance and then Upwork has had, it's probably more than lots and lots of other charities put together, right? Because it's provided direct economic livelihood to tens of millions of people over the years, and we've only just begun, right? So I think, I mean, that's the most gratifying thing that and it's funny. I sort of travel a lot internationally sometimes, and I'll when people discover I sort of founded Elance, they'll be like, hey, I've been using Elance. I mean, I hear these stories all the time in different parts of the world where, we were just one or two guys when we started out, but because of Elance now we've built a business and we employ 100 other people, and they've just grown over the years, and it's a very common thing. I mean, a lot of people, even in business settings, will say, hey, I was, in fact, a journalist had mentioned that I was working on a job that I didn't like, but I wanted to try journalism and experiment with it. And sort of Elance provided that opportunity to try it on part-time before it became full-time, and so on. So whether it's, whether you want like this work-life balance, like working moms, as I was talking about, or whether you are sort of geographically far-flung areas and you want to plug into the global economy, or you're looking for career change. I mean, everybody wants flexibility, right? Because our interests change, our capabilities change, and so on. And a system like this provides that. So it provides goodness in a lot of ways, right? Not just the economic aspect, but even in sort of work satisfaction, life satisfaction. Even in the US, where you'd argue the economy is strong, but oftentimes people are stressed or unhappy in other ways, and this just allows you to reorient or rebalance what we are doing. So I think the impact is far-reaching, and we are a long way from being done yet. I think it's going to continue to have greater and greater impact over the years.
Oh, it's an incredible platform, and I totally agree. It's one of those, like, there'll be a tipping point. I think it's seen multiple tipping points, but I think like from a big tipping point, it's yet to happen. But why don't you talk a little bit about what you're working on now, and then maybe some ways in which listeners can follow you, learn about you, and just continue to learn from you.
Sure. So I founded 8-9 years. I was on the board a lot longer after that. But after I left my operating role at Elance, I founded another company called Gupshup, which is where I'm still focused on. And Gupshup is a Hindi word which means chit chat, and it's an appropriate name for a company that's focused on messaging and chat. We are a platform that enables enterprises to send messages and have conversations with customers. We are a really scale company. We have tens of thousands of enterprises. We send messages to hundreds of millions of customers, and these amount to billions of messages. So we are innovating, again, another one of these services that touches hundreds of millions of lives and so on. So I think we're driving some innovation in terms of enabling IP messaging from traditional SMS messaging, also enabling chatbots, conversational agents, and so on. So that's a whole different conversation, maybe for another call.
For sure. Because of anything that is changing rapidly, it's the methods of communication.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think I've always been drawn to or excited by ideas that really far-reaching, that can touch lots and lots of people. So anyway, I am at my Twitter handle is just my first name. That's at Beerud, Beerud. LinkedIn, again, a fringe benefit of an unusual name like mine is that it sort of works in almost any namespace. So easy to find on LinkedIn. Gupshup.io is my current website. And yeah, I would love to engage with anybody who wants to reach out.
We'll make sure we put all those the links and so forth in show notes, and also kind of in the video. We'll put a link in there as well. But Beerud, thank you so much for being on today. This has been awesome. We'll definitely have to do a conversation about Gupshup, because that's something that I've thought extensively about, which is people don't answer the phone anymore, right?
Exactly.
They have, email, they have text, they have messaging. I think communication, right, is definitely evolving and probably hasn't necessarily evolved to the point where there's kind of a centralized way in which people are communicating, but I believe it's going to whatever that point is. So we'll definitely have to talk again.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Would love to do that.
All right, Beirut, thank you again so much. Been awesome conversation. Thank you for what you continue to do to take your ideas and bring them to fruition. And we'll have you back on sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoyed talking to you.